Hello and welcome to the second Q&A with me, Meta-Nomad. So I'm just going through the questions which were sent to me on the Patreon thread or in the Q&A channel in the Discord. I've taken out the names of the people who asked the questions, so these are just free floating. So the first question is, what do you think romantic love can or should teach us as humans? I'm somewhat of a romantic in a personal sense, but I would, in terms of what it can teach us, I would go off the Serzian or Michel Serres view that there's different levels of communication, and to overlap them in any sort of primary way is a mistake. So that's to say that when people sort of deconstruct love to just chemicals, what they're doing is making a mistake of levels of communication, because the level of communication where chemicals react and communicate with each other is far different to the level of communication wherein one understands on an interpersonal level that they actually love someone. So in terms of what love can teach us, in a communication sense, it can teach us that there's multiple things going on at the same time between different processes. But I think the aim of this question is a bit more nostalgic and generally romantic than that. And as lovely as the idea of a sort of global, everybody love each other, overarching idea is, it would be silly to say that can actually be a thing. You know, sort of when Jesus said, like, love thy neighbor, I just can't ever see how that's often used as a justification for sort of globalism, or this idea that we need to help everyone that we possibly can. And I actually think that really you need to take that down to a localizable level, wherein it literally means what it is. And I think, love thy neighbor is in your actual neighbor. And I think the most important thing with regards to love is to not try extend it to some sphere that you can't immediately affect, and to do it as noticeably as you can within a sphere in which you actually notice the effects. Anything else I consider insincere. 2, what moment or time do you look back on involving yourself that makes you cringe so hard with regret or shame that you look like you're about to sneeze? I remember reading this question, and I remember thinking I don't particularly want to answer it. Not because of, everyone has their regrets and everyone has their shames. I think the main thing to actually take from this question is that I tend to have the initial sort of cringeworthy wince at a regrettable moment. And I think if you're having that, don't try to push it away. Sit with it until you can work out what it is about that previous moment that made you cringe so hard now, and try to work out what it was that you find so regretful or shameful, and work with that and try improve yourself. So like, I still have those moments, but in my mind I've sort of worked through them, which is sort of a relatively painful process, but I've worked through them to figure out how I can change that to now and stop making the mistakes which you find so regrettable. But I'm not gonna tell you any of them because I just, I don't particularly want to. 3, alternatively, what's the dumbest thing you've ever said? Once again, this is sort of along the same lines of, like, it's all in context, and things that a lot of philosophers have this real neurotic thing about being embarrassed by their really early work. Now, I had that for a short time. Like, I have a lot of early work out there which not everyone knows about because it was under my real name at the time, and I think actually most of it's deleted anyway, but there's some stuff, and like, I've gone back and read it, and I sort of do cringe, and I think, oh boy, what was I even thinking or doing? But at the same time, it's like, well, without that you wouldn't have got where you are. So to a certain extent, I think it's fine to say dumb things as long as you're fully prepared to realize they're dumb, and when you realize they're dumb, to move on. So some of the things I'm saying now in these episodes, I consider, I may potentially consider dumb at some point. So, dumbest thing I've ever said, I can't think of one. I'm sorry. I noticed you tweeted a graph about Amazon's business model. I've been reading into the history of antitrust law from its origin through its reversal in the consumption-focused neolib, Reagan era, and Amazon's antitrust paradox, as the famous article calls it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on Amazon as a massive representation and indicator of our times economically and politically. Basically, whatever thoughts or reading you have on it. With regards to Amazon, their business model, which is why I love that chart, is like, it's the business model which is they've found an equilibrium in a Deleuze-Guattarian sense. So like all the profits that Bezos gets from Amazon, all the profits that Amazon gets, you can notice by that chart that it goes right up to the profit, and then it goes straight back down because he reinvests all the profits into the business itself. And that's why it's so exponential, is because basically the actual profit margin is so low because everything immediately gets put back into reinvestment. And like I've heard rumors that Amazon's going into agriculture, and like if I had to put money on it, I would say that the next thing Amazon will go into big time would be home security, especially in certain areas in America. And obviously there's going to be the drones and things along these lines, and the idea of like drones just shipping you your package within an hour and stuff like that. One of the reasons I lean towards the mold buggy and neo-cameralist system wherein you have a private corporation is because basically living in Britain, I mean this might not be true for everywhere in the world, but I put money on that it basically is that without a profit loss dynamic or the idea that you need to profit from something, the motivation to make something really well is sort of stripped away. And this is sort of the original Adam Smith argument with regards to like the baker will bake good bread because he's getting profit from it, whereas there is no incentive for him to do that if he's no longer getting a profit. And of course, communists and people along these lines will say that the incentive will be just to make good bread because people will enjoy it, I just don't see that. And my point with this is that people can hate on Amazon in terms of ethics all they like, but in terms of private corporations, I can think of very few in comparison to nationalized and government corporations which I've had a problem with. So I've probably ordered thousands of items on Amazon at this point, and I don't think I've ever had a single problem with their system. It's only ever been on the side of the human error on the side of a third party seller, and that's been very minor as well. So like in terms of a private system, if you thought of that in terms of a sovereign state, you'd be understanding that the customer service is incredible. But of course there's the problem in business that people only ever really focus on the negatives and not the positives. So it's rare that someone ever thinks, well, actually, this has always been consistently great. I should sort of respect that and understand that that's a sort of form of beauty in itself. But so like my thoughts on Amazon are like, I'm not really anti-corporation or anything along those lines. I think Bezos is like, probably one of the best businessmen who's ever lived, and he understands the dynamics of business very well, that the way to get growth is to reinsert profits back into the system. In terms of an indicator of our times economically and politically, I do sort of think that we're heading towards a Judge Dredd type situation where you have these sort of 5, instead of cities, you'd have sort of 5 to 10 mega corporations. And I think Amazon is the first one that we're seeing, because it doesn't seem to me that Amazon is making any bold risks. They are really a key example of the tortoise and the hare. So yeah. Question 5. What is the Kabbalah? Land talked about it in relation to numbers, and I never knew what the fuck he was talking about, or even what to look up or how to spell it. Could you elaborate, explain what the concept is and its relation to Land's thought? So Kabbalah Kabbalah, which originally is spelled with a K, so it's Kabbalah, is a form of Jewish mysticism originally related to this diagram called the Tree of Life. I go on about this in the CCOU course, actually. Now, what it is the idea that letters of the Hebrew alphabet words of the Hebrew alphabet have a numeric meaning, which then relates back to the Tree of Life, and everything can be ascribed down to 1 and 10, and therefore you can find meaning from things which connect, which then relates to this form of another form of mysticism called gematria, which is the idea that you assign letters numbers, and then when you have a word, you can then combine that into a whole number, and then each word would have its own number, and you can begin to relate certain words and certain phrases to each other and find distinct meanings between words which weren't immediately apparent, or meanings within things which weren't immediately apparent. The way this relates to Land's work is that he I won't go into the absolute details of this now because it's fairly long-winded, but he, or the CCRU, invented and came up with a numeric system of their own called the numogram, where they digit sum. They begin, in the tree of life begins at 1, they begin at 0 and go to 9 instead of 1 to 10. Land spells it QABBALA because when you put that through the geometric system and work out its numeric signification, what number it is assigned to, it's related to the numismatic practice. So Land's alteration is that, but in terms of its relation to Land's thought, there would be a whole sort of hour lecture on its own just to get to why that actually makes complete sense. But in short, for him, it is a means of communicating with the outside and understanding what the outside is doing. Question 6. What's going on with my occult practice? So you say I mentioned this with Greer without ever really going into it. I think this was in the Occultism 101 episode. That was a year or so ago, and I was practicing a system of Hermeticism, Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermitix, which is something that I stopped because it was just getting a bit too full on, and I don't think I'm someone who can really handle that kind of thing. And then briefly, about half a year ago, I started up again because I thought, well, I'll give it another shot. And once again, the same thing happened, and I just couldn't really keep up the pace. People don't seem to understand that occult work is exhausting. Why did I take it up? Because I was interested in the field, and I was interested in the practice generally. Like, I'm realised now I'm more interested in the history of occultism as opposed to the actual practice. The practice to me is something that I personally have found isn't what something else can be, which I'll get into in a later question. Why did I choose the course I did? Because Franz Bardon says that initiation to Hermitix is one of the real beginner series. It's really step by step, and he calls it an occult system for the busiest of men. So it's like you can do 10 minutes a day and you'll get somewhere. How's it going? I'm no longer doing it. I will, there's another question later on, which goes into this, which I'll put this question in now. So someone's asked, am I still considering Catholicism or mere Christianity? Yes, which is why I've stopped the practice, because there's a brilliant article by Akira, if any, the guy who owns and runs Love Crypt Records, who you might still be able to find this article online, where he talks about, he seems to have taken the same path as me in being interested in occult stuff and being very close to practicing it, and then realizing that if you're going to practice that kind of thing, and you want to align yourself with the good, why not just align yourself with the one good, which is God, which is the Christian God, which is how I see it. Of course, many occultists would disagree, but I've found much more peace with that. As regards as to whether or not it be specifically Catholicism, I'm sort of spending a lot of time trying to understand denominations and just trying to understand the history of Christianity at the moment. So I'm not sort of willy-nilly going in as a sort of LARP. I want wherever I end up to be a sincere move. You say Klager speaks about Christianity with even more venom than Nietzsche did, so I'm wondering if that has affected this in any way. I haven't read, it might have been some in Cosmogonic Eros, but I can't remember. People who speak about Christianity with venom, such as Nietzsche, it's the area actually with Nietzsche that I find very cringy, and I find I'm actually in agreement with Father Seraphim Rose, who's an Orthodox Christian, which is that those who scorn against Christianity the loudest are those who are yearning for God the loudest. There's a brilliant passage in his book on nihilism where he talks about how Nietzsche is just yearning for God and just craving God because of all this. As far as I'm concerned, Nietzsche is a crypto-Christian. Klager's potentially not, because Klager's was far, far different and potentially better. What do you think of June and its relation to accelerationism? Okay, there's two questions there. What do I think of June? I think it's okay. I don't think it's actually that well written, but I think it's a fantastic story. I don't have too much to go. I'm not one of these June fanboys who spent so much time with it. I just think it's a great novel, but I think there's better ones out there. Relation to accelerationism, perhaps I'm completely missing something there, but I can't see any immediate connection. I know Land the spice must flow. Maybe, I don't know. I can't see an immediate connection. Without spoiling anything, where do you hope to see Hermitix going in a year from now? I'm not big on. I can't really spoil it because a lot of that I don't know. But there's one thing that I'll add, which is I'm going to start a Deleuze series alongside the Michel Serres series, just because I really want to do that. Deleuze is really popular at the moment. People I think would really enjoy that. Where do I see it in the year from now? Just weekly episodes, more Michel Serres series. Hopefully a new lecture series where I just start the continental current thing. Not to get too grifty, but hopefully a bit more support, just so I can actually put some more money into creating these things. Basically just being a lot bigger and a lot more streamlined. What do I think about the philosophy of Georges Sorel? Unfortunately, I've never read any Sorel, so I can't comment at all. Could I break down how Nick Land understands time? What paradigm is he working in? Right. So the latter question there is the more important one. What paradigm is he working in? He's working with regards to time in the Kantian paradigm. He is coming at it from the point of view that with regards to Kantian representation, our understanding of linear time is completely locked in via representation. So the way we understand time is completely flawed. So like Nick said to me, you can't have time in time. Clock time, or minutes, seconds, hours, linear time, is already within the pure form of time. Therefore, it's a false form of time. It only seems real because our consciousness experiences it that way. So for Nick, there's a lot of writing about breaking out of time, how time is on the outside, how it affects us, etc. But the way he understands time is that in the transcendental mode of time, it's not linear, or at least nowhere near how we experience it. What are my thoughts on kids and having them? I'd love to have kids someday. Did I start researching SARE in order to prepare for podcasting writing articles? I began researching SARE just because on my master's course, we happened to do a research module on SARE, and I sort of fell in love. So the reason I've done the SARE series is just because I love his philosophy, and that's the reason I started researching him as well. What are my thoughts on David Foster Wallace? I'm one of the few, it seems, remaining Foster Wallace defenders. I really enjoyed Infinite Jest. I thought The Pale King was close to being a masterpiece and would have been had he finished it. I think some of his writing is extremely funny, but I will admit he's a man of his time. I don't think he's going to go down in any halls of fame. I don't think he's going to sort of end up in the canon in any sense. But I think for a sort of 18 to 22-year-old man, especially, living in either America or the UK, who is sort of overeducated and understimulated and spiritually lost, those books are extremely poignant and to a certain degree very helpful. So I think Foster Wallace is one of those authors that you should at least read a little bit of just to see if you like him, because if you do like him, you will become obsessed. What skills do I have or are learning for the upcoming collapse? Well, we just got these lambs, and we're breeding the quail. The quail are now gone, but we've got another 60 eggs in the incubator. So the lambs, the livestocking, sort of understanding how, their needs and things along these lines. I've obviously got the joinery work, which will sort of help with that kind of thing. We're growing a lot of veg at the moment. I think the most important one is learning the learning curve of any of these. So just start doing it and see how far you get in like a couple of months, and you'll realize why it is that people sort of say things like, well, if the world just ended, I'd just grow some veg. And it's like, it's not that simple, What is the prep work for a podcast episode? What is the post episode work? So the prep work for a podcast episode is I will email the author and see if they're keen on doing the interview. If they say yes, then I will read the book or do the research, send them over a load of questions. Some of them are good on the fly, which Greer is one of these. I'll send them over all the questions, then we'll organise, then we will record. And then once the post-episode work is, I edit the audio and I cut out the ums and ahs and the long pauses and anything that will sort of stop the flow, removing all the noise and the static, etc. Then I, create all the bits and bobs, the artwork, the descriptions, etc. And then we're ready to go. There isn't too much more to it than that. I never want to overcomplicate things, because then it just gets in the way of the substance. Who is my favourite saint? I don't have one, actually. Yeah. What's my diet like? I've tried pretty much every diet under the sun. I felt the best on carnivore diet, and then keto. And at the moment, my diet is just largely like meat and veg and the occasional treat. It's very close to keto, but it's fairly standard. A lot of veg and a lot of meat. You know, just a very standard diet really at the moment. There's no sort of. I drink a lot of peppermint tea. Other than that, I don't have any really specific things at the moment. I think if I was ever in a situation to do it again, I'd love to go carnivore again, but it is an extremely awkward diet to do socially. Yeah. That's been Q&A 2. If anyone wants a follow up to these questions, just reply and I can DM you, or answer whatever needs be. But thanks for the support, everyone, and just keep on listening, and be lots more to come in the future.